I am the administrator of the Attic Archive in Dundee, Scotland. Today I am in Budapest in Artpool with an installation of material from the Attic Archive which has come across to be relocated in Artpool. The archive is in three parts: the data project, the journals of Marshall Anderson and the work of Peter Haining. Artpool have a specific interest in the data project, so most of the material from the data project is now here. When Pete Horobin started the data project in 1980, he was responding very much to an innate, instinctive drive to put his documentation into the post. He had already worked with an art group in Paris called Cairn, so when he started the data project and began to distribute his documentation through the post, one of the recipients was Cairn in Paris, and they put Pete Horobin onto their mailing list, and as a consequence of that, people working in the mail art network and the correspondence art network started to communicate directly with Pete Horobin. One of the first people to do so was Peter Bilo in Germany, and this particular box is dedicated to Peter Bilo. We have a collaborative project with Peter Bilo and Pete Horobin, work on canvas to make an original bookwork. And when this bookwork was being made, Pete Horobin was living in Dysart, which is a small village on the sea in Fife in Scotland, and Bilo was living in Würzburg in Germany. Around the same time as Peter Bilo started to correspond with Pete Horobin, an artist from England called Robin Crozier also started to send material to the Attic Archive. In the mid-80s, Robin Crozier started a project called the Memorandum Project. This is a typical memorandum page. What happened was Robin Crozier would initiate one of these pages and send it to a particular correspondent to complete. The completed pages would be returned to Robin Crozier, and then Robin Crozier would send the completed memorandum pages to other people within his network. In 1982, Peter Bilo invited Horobin to participate in the first Neoist Network's European training camp. And as a result of that, Pete Horobin started to work very closely with the Neoist group. This long suitcase here has on the top of it a chronogram, which is a symbol designed by Pete Horobin to explain Neoism. The two parallel lines are timelines going into the future and coming from the future to the past, so that the timelines cross and Neoism is placed in the centre. Inside the case are various Neoist objects made by different people working within the Neoist network. This Neoist sign is made by Mark Pawson. These matches commemorate the first meeting of Robin Crozier and Pete Horobin in Newcastle in England in 1981, and they are dedicated like so: Robin Crozier and Pete Horobin. We have a t-shirt made by Istvan Kantor, also known as Monty Canson, and this is a special Neoist boxing hat the newest apartment festivals would always have a boxing tournament, and the winner of the boxing tournament would receive this hat, which he had to wear for at least a year, and then when the next apartment festival was held, again there would be a boxing tournament, and the new champion of the boxing tournament would take the hat for a year. Face masks made by Vula in Germany, and here we have an armless soldier made by Istvan Kantor. We have the very first gold chapati that was made by Pete Horobin during the London Apartment Festival in 1984. David Zak is the father of Monty Canson, and when David Zak was corresponding with Pete Horobin, he was living in the Immortality Center in Tepoztlan, Mexico. And this is typical David Zak correspondence. Most of the correspondence that Pete Horobin received from David Zak was photocopied, and it was very obvious that David Zak's photocopier in Tepoztlan in Mexico was not the best quality. However, the raw vitality and passionate energy that David Zak had for correspondence is very evident in the material that he posted out. He understood, obviously, that the weight was very important, so he always worked with very thin envelopes, packing these envelopes with as much material as he could afford to post out at any one particular time. Some of the cassettes that David Zak posted out: he was a fantastic cello player. He had learnt the cello at a very young age and continued to play the cello throughout his life. He also played guitar and sang. So his cassettes would be a mixture of cello music, singing, improvised poetry, and a correspondence form of spoken letters. In 1984, Pete Horobin organised the 8th Newest Apartment Festival in London, and one of the people who came along to the 8th Newest Apartment Festival was a very young man at that time called Stuart Home. His original idea was that anyone could make a smile magazine. This little arrow pointing the way to a smile was made by Mark Pawson. This is the very first smile magazine, made by Stuart Home in 1984, with himself on the cover. As you can see, he's very young. This smile magazine is by Vittor Baroni. This one is by Arthur Berkhoff, who was living in the Netherlands at that time. All of these smile magazines with similar cover are handmade editions. This one is made by Pete Horobin, and it's a mixture of photo collages, mostly celebrating the 8th Newest Apartment Festival in London. This is a smile magazine again, made by Pete Horobin. Carlo Pittore was one of the first male artists to contact Pete Horobin, probably around about 1981. Carlo Pittore made fantastic audio works. His energy and vitality came out through the songs that he sang and the music that he made. This was the very first audio cassette that Carlo sent to Pete Horobin. And like many male artists, he would put a lot of concentrated focus into his envelopes. This particular envelope is made from handmade paper that in fact was made not by Carlo Pittore but by the Crackerjack Kid.